No one noticed the exact day she disappeared. There was no big headline, no breaking news alert. One week she was seen at meetings, calm and sharp as always. The next week, her office light stayed off. Calls went unanswered. Assistants were told she was traveling. Then even they stopped hearing from her. For years, she had built her life carefully. She worked longer than most people slept. She trusted numbers more than people. Money was never her goal, but control was. She believed that if she stayed smart and alert, nothing could break her world. That belief lasted until the day everything cracked at once. It started quietly. A deal she approved without checking twice. A partner she trusted because everyone else did. A document she signed while tired. Within days, rumors began to move faster than facts. People whispered about missing funds, about betrayal, about mistakes that could not be undone. She tried to fix it. She really did. Late nights turned into early mornings. Lawyers talked in circles. Advisors avoided her eyes. Every solution cost something, and every delay made things worse. Then came the moment that hurt the most. Someone she trusted deeply turned away, not out of anger, but fear. That look stayed with her longer than any loss of money. By the end of the month, the truth was clear. She was not ruined, but she was broken in a way numbers could not repair. The company survived. Her name did not. In public, she stayed calm. In private, she barely slept. Silence filled her large house, making every room feel empty. One night, she stood in front of her mirror and did something she had never done before. She asked herself a simple question. Who am I without all this? The answer scared her. The next morning, she made a decision that shocked a few people still close to her. She sold most of what she owned, not because she needed the money, but because she needed distance. She kept only what had fit in one small bag. Clothes that did not stand out. Shoes that had seen better days. No jewelry. No signs of the life she once lived. She left without telling anyone where she was going. The city she chose was not on any list she had ever made before. It was smaller, colder, and rough around the edges. People there minded their own business. That was exactly what she wanted. She rented nothing. She booked nothing. She walked. The first night was harder than she expected. Concrete was unforgiving. Noise never stopped. Hunger came quickly. She realized how loud the world was when you had nowhere to hide. People looked through her, not at her. Some avoided her. Others stared too long. By the second day, her body ached. By the third, her pride was gone. She told herself this was temporary, just a test, just time to think. But deep inside, she knew she was running from something heavier than failure. A memory followed her everywhere. There was a man she had not thought about in years, yet his shadow stayed close. He was part of her past in a way that still burned. She blamed him for a loss she never fully spoke about. Every time things went wrong in her life, his face appeared in her thoughts, calm and silent, as if he had accepted a fate she could not. She hated that memory. She hated how powerless it made her feel. As she moved through the city, she avoided places that reminded her of who she used to be. She stood in food lines without speaking. She learned which streets felt safer at night. She watched people who lived this life every day and wondered how they survived without hope turning bitter. On the fourth evening, the sky darkened early. Rain started without warning. Her jacket was thin, her shoes soaked through. She walked faster, then slower, until her legs gave up arguing. That was when she realized she was lost. She stopped in front of a row of old buildings. Paint peeled from the walls. Lights flickered behind dirty windows. She did not recognize the street name. Panic rose in her chest, sharp and sudden. She had money hidden away, but no place to go. She thought about sleeping under an awning. She thought about walking until morning. Then she saw a familiar shape. Her breath caught. Across the street was a door she had seen before. Not recently, not in this city, but in her memory, clear as day. The same narrow steps, the same cracked frame. Time had changed it, but not enough. Her heart began to race. This was impossible. She told herself that again and again. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be somewhere else, living a life far from hers. A life she never wanted to see again. Yet there it was, the place she never thought she would stand in front of. Anger rose first. Old, hot, and familiar. She thought about turning away, about walking into the rain, and pretending this street never existed. Her hand shook as she pulled it back into her pocket. But the cold was winning. So was exhaustion. She stood there for a long moment, rain dripping from her hair, weighing a choice she never wanted to make. Pride argued loudly. Survival whispered softly. Finally, she stepped forward, her hand lifted, slow and unsure. She knocked once. The sound echoed louder than it should have. On the other side of the door, footsteps approached. She held her breath, heart pounding, knowing that whatever happened next would change more than just this night. The door began to open. The man she hated most stood there for a moment, blinking as the rain dripped down the porch. He did not recognize her at first. All he saw was a stranger, soaked and shivering, his brow furrowed slightly, and without saying a word, he stepped aside to let her in. His movements were careful, practiced, almost automatic. He did not ask questions. He only offered a blanket and a chair by the small stove in the corner. She froze for a moment, not expecting kindness from him. Anger churned in her chest, but was tempered by exhaustion. She shivered, wrapping the blanket around herself, feeling warmth seep into her bones. The room was small and simple. Books lined the walls, though not neatly. A few pieces of furniture were worn, but clean. It was clear that he lived modestly, quietly, in a way that contrasted sharply with the life she had known. He spoke finally, his voice calm. "You can stay here until the rain stops. Then you'll have to figure out your next step." She blinked, uncertain. His words were matter-of-fact, almost indifferent. Yet there was no judgment, no trace of past grievances she had carried for years. She wanted to argue, to demand an explanation for why he was here, why he still existed in her life. But the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she just sat, feeling the warmth of the fire and the faint smell of old books and tea. She noticed how his hands moved as he set a kettle on the stove, how careful he was with each step. He did not notice her watching, or if he did not care. There was a quiet dignity in his simplicity that made her uneasy. She wanted to leave. She wanted to tell him who she really was, to test him, to see if he would recognize her and falter. But something in her chest held her back. She had no plan, no words to justify her sudden appearance. Pride whispered that she should leave now, while she could still vanish like a shadow in the rain. The man turned toward her then, offering a cup of tea. She took it silently, the warmth of the liquid matching the warmth of the room. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Outside, the rain pounded steadily, a reminder that the world could be harsh and relentless. He finally spoke again, his voice low. "It's been a long day. You look like you've had a longer life than most people in this neighborhood." She almost laughed, but the sound came out as a sigh. How could she explain anything now? How could she tell him that she was not just a stranger, but someone who had once held power, who had once looked down on him and despised him? All the memories she had carried, all the bitterness she had nurtured, seemed small and meaningless in the presence of this quiet life he led. She remembered the moment that had fueled her hatred for him. Years ago, in a boardroom far from this street, he had made a choice that cost her something she had never recovered. She had blamed him for everything that went wrong after that. Every setback, every betrayal, she tied back to his actions. But here, in this small, simple room, she saw a man who had made mistakes, yes, but also one who had lived with consequences she could not begin to understand. The rain slowed, and the sound of dripping water replaced the steady pounding. She did not move. She felt like a child again, helpless and exposed, waiting for someone to decide her fate. He did not offer pity. He offered a quiet acceptance that she found disarming. He did not ask for explanations, did not demand proof of identity. He simply offered shelter. Hours passed. They moved through the day in silence, interrupted only by the soft clatter of the kettle, the occasional sound of footsteps from the street outside, or the distant murmur of neighbors. She watched him cook a simple meal, his hands steady, his movements precise. He did not speak much, but there was a rhythm to his life that was comforting in a strange way. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and hesitant. Why are you being kind to me?" He looked up, his expression neutral. "Because it's the right thing to do. No one deserves to be out in the rain, not even strangers." Her chest tightened. It was the first time in years that someone treated her without suspicion, without expectation. She realized that she had been wrong about him. All these years, she had carried anger and resentment that had nothing to do with who he really was. She had built a fortress of hatred in her mind, and now it felt fragile, crumbling in the warmth of this small room. She wanted to ask more. She wanted to demand answers. She wanted to tell him who she really was. But every time she opened her mouth, the word stuck. The anger that had burned so brightly now felt heavy and pointless. It was replaced by a quiet confusion she could not name. He did not push. He let her sit there, letting the silence stretch, let her thoughts collide with the reality she had avoided for so long. There was no judgment, no reminder of the past, only the present and the simple truth that someone had opened their door when she had nowhere else to go. As evening fell, the room darkened and the city outside quieted. The soft glow of the stove was the only light, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. She felt tired in a way she had not felt in years. Not physically, but emotionally. The weight of years of anger, pride, and fear pressed down on her shoulders. She realized that her journey had not been about escape from the world, but from herself. She had hidden behind her wealth, her power, her pride, thinking that these things could protect her from pain. Now, standing in the simple warmth of this man's home, she understood that protection had been illusion. He broke the silence again, his voice quiet, almost casual. "You don't have to explain. Sit, rest. Tomorrow is another day." She nodded, unable to speak. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten. Hope. Sleep came slowly, but it came. She dreamed not of money or power, but of small moments of kindness she had ignored in her life, faces she had dismissed, opportunities she had overlooked. All the things that had seemed small now felt enormous. And when she woke, she would have to face the world again. But for tonight, she was allowed to simply be human, vulnerable, and alive. She did not know what the next day would bring. She did not know if she could forgive him or herself. But she knew one thing. The man she had hated most had shown her a truth she could not have learned anywhere else. And that truth would change the path she would take from this moment onward. The next morning, the city felt different. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets damp and shining under a weak morning sun. She woke slowly, wrapped in the blanket he had given her, feeling the strange comfort of safety for the first time in years. The room smelled faintly of tea and wood smoke. She sat up and watched him move around quietly, preparing breakfast with the same calm, careful rhythm she had noticed the day before. She wanted to ask questions, to uncover the truth behind his simple life. But the words felt heavy, loaded with the weight of years and the bitterness she had carried. Instead, she sat silently, drinking the tea he handed her. The warmth spread through her, and she noticed a faint tremble in her hands that she had not seen before. He watched her for a moment, then nodded, as if understanding that some things were not ready to be spoken aloud. "Eat," he said simply. She did, slowly. The food was modest, but nourishing. She realized how long it had been since she had eaten without distraction, without meetings, without calculating the cost of every bite. She felt something unfamiliar, a quiet, fragile peace. As she finished, he spoke, almost casually. "You must be tired. You can stay as long as you need, but eventually you'll have to move on. Life doesn't wait." She nodded, but her mind was racing. Memories of past betrayals, of anger and resentment, bubbled to the surface. She had hated him for years, blaming him for her losses, for the mistakes she had made, for the life she had lost. But now, in the calm of the small room, she felt the first stirrings of doubt. Had she misunderstood him all this time? Had her anger been misplaced? She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. He was not the man she remembered from her anger-filled memories. He was quiet, thoughtful, and unassuming. There was no trace of the arrogance or betrayal she had imagined. His eyes, calm and steady, held a warmth she had never expected. Her chest tightened. She had carried a story about him in her mind, a story that had justified her hatred. But the man before her did not fit that story. The story was hers, not his. The day passed slowly. They moved through small routines. He cleaned, she watched. He cooked, she helped. He mended a chair. She brought tools. Words were few, but the silence was not heavy. It was a shared understanding, a bridge being built silently between two people who had once been strangers in their own lives. She began to notice the details of his life. A photograph on the wall, a note on the table, a carefully folded blanket. He lived simply, but he lived fully. He did not need recognition, power, or wealth. He had built a life that was steady, grounded, and honest. And she realized with a mix of awe and regret that she had spent so long chasing things that could never offer her the same peace. That evening, he suggested they take a walk. She hesitated, but the fresh air called to her. The streets were quiet, the city settling into night. As they walked, she noticed people she had ignored before. The street vendors, the children playing, the elderly man sitting alone. Life went on here, simple and unadorned. She felt the weight of her own past pressing against her chest, but she walked anyway, step by step. Finally, he stopped near a small park, the kind that did not appear on any map for tourists. The grass was damp, the benches empty. He looked at her quietly and spoke. You don't have to carry the past with you forever. It's heavy, and it changes the way you see everything. Sometimes it's enough to just let it sit, to face it, and then move forward. She wanted to argue, to say that the past had shaped her, that it defined her, but she could not. His words resonated in a way that bypassed her mind and went straight to her heart. She realized that she had been living in anger and regret for too long, and it had cost her more than she could measure. For the first time, she spoke honestly, quietly, without planning her words. I thought I hated you, she said, for everything. He looked at her, not with surprise, but with a calm that seemed to have always been there. Maybe you did, he said, but hatred doesn't always tell the full story. Sometimes it's just pain dressed up as anger. Her eyes filled with tears she had not expected. She looked down, ashamed, not just for her past feelings, but for the years she had wasted holding on to them. He did not reach out, did not try to comfort her. He let her feel what she needed to feel, and in that, there was a strange kind of care. They walked back in silence, the night cool around them. The city felt different now, not threatening, not harsh, but alive in a way that she had never noticed before. Each step seemed lighter, each breath easier. Back in the small room, she sat by the stove again. He moved quietly, tending to simple chores. She watched him, thinking about how easy it would have been to continue hating him, to leave with her anger intact. But now, the anger felt small and unnecessary, a shadow that could no longer reach her. She realized that her journey, her disappearance, had not been about hiding from the world. It had been about hiding from herself. She had needed to confront the truth of her own pride, her own pain, and her own misconceptions. And in this simple home, with this man she had once blamed, she had begun to see that truth. Hours passed. She talked a little, asking questions about his life, about his routines, about the choices he had made. He answered simply, honestly, without judgment or expectation. She listened, realizing that for the first time in years, she was not defending herself, not calculating her responses, not measuring her words against imagined consequences. As night fell again, she felt exhaustion mixed with a new sensation, understanding. She understood that people are more complex than the stories we tell ourselves. That mistakes do not define a person, and neither does anger. That kindness, even from unexpected places, has the power to change the way we see the world. She wrapped herself in the blanket again, feeling the warmth and the quiet of the room. She thought about the life she had left behind, about the mistakes she had made, and about the man who had opened his door when she had nowhere else to go. She realized that forgiveness, even if it did not come fully, was possible, even if it came just as understanding. She drifted into sleep that night with a strange sense of calm. The man had not asked her to forgive him, and she had not yet done so. But for the first time in years, She felt the possibility of a future unburdened by anger, a future where she could see clearly, not through the lens of hate, but with eyes open to truth. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring questions, choices, and perhaps even challenges. But tonight, in this small, quiet room, she had found something she had not realized she was searching for, a glimpse of peace, a sense that people are not always what we expect, and that sometimes those who blame the most may hold the key to our own understanding. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the cracked blinds, painting faint lines across the small room. She woke slowly, feeling the warmth of the blanket and the lingering calm from the night before. The city outside was waking up, its usual hum mixing with distant voices, car engines, and the occasional bark of a dog. Inside, the room remained quiet, safe, almost suspended from the rest of the world. He moved about the room with a sense of purpose, quietly preparing breakfast. She watched him, noticing details she had missed before. The careful way he stacked dishes, the way he wiped his hands on a clean cloth, the slight weariness in his shoulders that spoke of years of hard work. She realized he lived a life she had only ever imagined in fragments, a life of quiet resilience and steady endurance. She stirred, wrapping herself tighter in the blanket. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know something." He looked up, his expression calm. "What is it?" She hesitated. Words had been lodged in her throat for years, suddenly demanded release. Why did you do it? Back then, when everything went wrong. His eyes flickered briefly, a shadow of pain passing across his face. Then he nodded slowly. "I made choices," he said simply. "Choices that had consequences you didn't see. I never wanted to hurt you. But life doesn't give us perfect options. Sometimes we do what we think is right, even when it hurts others." She stared at him, struggling to process the words. He sounded honest, but the memory of anger, of betrayal, of nights spent reliving the worst moments of her life, was heavy on her chest. She wanted to scream, to accuse, to demand justice. But the calm in his voice, the simplicity of his truth, made her pause. For hours, they moved through the day slowly. Words came in small doses, but each one carried weight. He explained his life choices, the pressures he had faced, the sacrifices he had made silently. Nothing was dramatic or embellished. Nothing was meant to excuse pain. But as she listened, piece by piece, she began to understand the man she had judged so harshly for so long. There were confessions, too. He admitted mistakes, some small, some that had contributed to her suffering. But he spoke with a quiet humility that made her realize he had lived with these mistakes every day, without seeking revenge or recognition. The anger she had nurtured for years now fell hollow, a barrier she no longer needed. They walked through the city in the afternoon. The streets were familiar now, but everything looked different. She noticed the care and small acts around her, the shopkeeper who waved, the neighbor tending a garden, children laughing as they ran past. Life moved in cycles she had ignored in her pursuit of success and control. At one point, they stopped near a small fountain. Water trickled down worn stones, clear and cold. She stared at it, lost in thought. "I blamed you for everything," she said quietly. "All these years, I couldn't see past my anger." He nodded, not defensively, not pleading, just acknowledging. Blame is easy. Understanding is hard. We often confuse the two. The simplicity of his words struck her. She realized that understanding him, truly seeing his side, required letting go of a rigid narrative. She constructed a story where he was a villain, where her pain was justified, and his existence a reminder of her loss. But the reality was more complicated. Life had shaped them both, but in ways she had never considered. Back at his small home, he prepared a simple dinner. She watched silently, noting the care he put into every step. Nothing about his life was flashy or impressive, but it was real, grounded, honest. And in that honesty, she felt a strange admiration, tinged with regret. After dinner, they sat together in silence. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp. Her mind replayed old events, but with a new perspective. She saw not just his choices, but her own stubbornness, her own pride, the way she had built walls around her heart. Finally, she spoke again. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted. "Not yet." But I understand now. Maybe for the first time, I can see the whole picture." He nodded slowly, not offering comfort, not expecting anything. "That's enough," he said. "Understanding is the first step. Forgiveness will come if it's meant to." She felt a tear slip down her cheek. It was not just sorrow, but relief. The weight she had carried for years, the anger and bitterness, was beginning to lift. She had feared that meeting him would reopen old wounds, but instead, it had begun to heal them. They spent the evening sharing small stories, mundane details, memories of distant events, moment of laughter she had not felt in a long time. She realized that the man she had hated most had also lived with pain, struggle, and disappointment. He was human, flawed, but real. As night fell, she prepared for bed with a quiet mind, her thoughts no longer racing with accusations or fear. She felt a strange sense of gratitude, not for the life he had lived, but for the truth he had shown her. The world outside was unpredictable, harsh, and sometimes cruel. But inside this small room, in the quiet of his life, she found clarity. She laid down, wrapped in a blanket, thinking about the journey she had undertaken. Not the physical journey across the city, but the emotional journey that had brought her to this place. She realized that understanding another person, seeing their choices and struggles, was a gift she had denied herself for years. Sleep came gently, carrying her into a rest she had long forgotten. Dreams were not filled with fear or anger, but with small, vivid images of kindness, resilience, and the possibility of forgiveness. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, what questions would arise, or what challenges would appear. But she knew one thing with certainty. The truth she had discovered, the understanding she had gained, had changed her. The man who had once been the symbol of her anger and resentment was no longer just a memory of pain. He was a living testament to the complexity of human life, to the choices we make, and to the quiet strength found in honesty and humility. She realized that in seeking revenge or clinging to hatred, she had only limited herself. Now, with clarity and understanding, she could begin to rebuild her own sense of self, guided not by anger, but by truth. And in that small, dimly lit room, with the soft hum of the city outside and the steady presence of the man she had hated most, she felt the first genuine sense of peace she had known in years. Understanding had come before forgiveness, and she knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. The morning sun came slowly through the thin curtains, casting soft light across the small room. She woke feeling a strange calm, a feeling she had not experienced in years. The past, the anger, the resentment, all seemed lighter, almost manageable. The man who had once been the symbol of her hatred was now a living reminder of understanding, of choices, and of humanity. They shared a simple breakfast in silence. The air was comfortable, quiet, and unhurried. She watched him move through his small kitchen, preparing tea and bread, noticing again the care he put into every action. It struck her that despite everything that had happened, he had chosen a life grounded in honesty and simplicity. There was no need for power or wealth to prove himself. Everything he did was about living rightly, not impressing anyone. She wanted to speak, to finally voice the thoughts and feelings that had built up over years. But words were hard. How could she explain what she had discovered about herself, about her anger, about her own life? How could she articulate the realization that the man she hated had never deserved that hatred? Finally, she spoke quietly, almost hesitantly. "I've spent years blaming you for everything. I thought it was you who caused my pain. But I see now it was more complicated. Life isn't that simple. I don't even know if I can forgive you fully. Not yet, but I understand. That's the first step, isn't it?" He looked at her, calm and steady, and nodded. "Understanding is enough for now. Forgiveness comes later, if it does. What matters is that you see clearly." Her chest tightened. Tears came without warning, slipping silently down her cheeks. They were tears of sorrow, yes, but also relief and a strange gratitude. She realized how much she had carried, how heavy anger and pride could be. And now, with understanding, a weight had lifted she had not known was there. They spent the morning talking softly, sharing small stories of their lives, mundane details, and moments of quiet joy. She learned about his struggles, his victories, and his choices. She saw a man who had lived through mistakes, faced consequences, and yet never let bitterness rule him. Each story, each detail chipped away at the anger she had built over years. By midday, she decided it was time to leave. Staying longer felt safe, but unreal. Her life was still out there, messy and complicated, waiting for her attention. She had to face it, but she knew she could do so with a new perspective. She packed her small bag, feeling a sense of readiness she had not felt in years. He walked with her to the door. She paused, looking at him, the man she had hated for so long. There was no expectation in his eyes, no demand, only quiet acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for letting me see the truth." He nodded, a small, understanding smile forming on his face. "Take care of yourself. And remember, life is not about blaming. It's about learning, moving forward, and making choices that honor yourself and others." She stepped out into the sunlight, feeling the warmth on her face. The city felt different now. She noticed the colors, the sounds, the small details she had overlooked before. She walked without haste, without fear, and without the anger that had haunted her for so long. The world was still imperfect, still full of challenges, but she felt stronger, more centered, and more aware of her own humanity. Over the next days, she began to rebuild her life. Not the life she had lost, not the life she had clung to, but a life grounded in what she had learned. She approached her work with patience and humility, understanding the importance of perspective and the weight of human choices. She treated colleagues, friends, and strangers with new empathy, realizing that everyone carries unseen struggles. Sometimes memories of the man she had hated returned, but instead of anger, they brought reflection and even gratitude. She thought about the lessons he had shown her, without even trying. The power of honesty, humility, and quiet strength. She realized that the people who challenge us most can also teach us the most, even if we do not recognize at first. Months later, she visited that small neighborhood again, not to return to his home, but to walk its streets, to remember what she had learned. The city no longer felt hostile. It was alive with stories, struggles, kindness, and resilience. She understood that life's value is found not in wealth or power, but in choices, understanding, and the courage to face reality. She never knew if he had ever thought about her again, and it did not matter. The lesson had been hers to take. She had carried the burden of anger for too long, and now she was free. Free to live, free to forgive, free to see the world and herself clearly. In her heart, she carried a quiet sense of peace. She understood that mistakes are human, that understanding can come before forgiveness, and that kindness, even when unexpected, can change lives. The journey she had taken, through loss, disguise, and confrontation, had reshaped her, not by erasing the past, but by helping her see it with clarity and acceptance. Life continued, with all its unpredictability, challenges, and small joys. She faced it with strength and humility, carrying the lessons she had learned with her. The man she had once hated had opened the door, and in doing so, had opened a path to understanding, empathy, and a life lived with eyes wide open. And as she walked forward, she knew that some lessons are more valuable than wealth, more powerful than anger, and more enduring than any grudge. She carried them quietly, in her actions, her thoughts, and her choices, forever changed by a small act of humanity that had arrived when she needed it most.